Did you hesitate before you jumped? Did you
Couldn't.
go for it?
No, the decision was made for me. It was roasting. You know, it was fry or jump, so it was jump.
A 110 miles from Aberdeen, beneath some of the fiercest waters in the North Sea, is the Piper oil field. The platform which exploited the field was gigantic. At its peak, it produced 30,000 tons of oil each day, worth £3.5 million. Its sheer size made it seem almost indestructible. But on the night of July the 6th, 1988, the unthinkable happened. In less than 3 hours, the Piper Alpha platform, standing 200 meters above the seabed, with 226 men on board, was reduced to this. The common image of the disaster is of a single devastating explosion. In fact, once it had begun, the catastrophe unfolded gradually. During one crucial hour, there were critical moments when it could have been averted. Owned by Occidental Petroleum, Piper Alpha was spectacularly productive. In June 1988, producing 10% of Britain's North Sea oil. It had been built in 1976, initially only to extract oil, but it was later adapted to produce gas as well. This left an unfortunate legacy in its design. The platform was made up of 4 modules, separated by fireproofed walls, arranged so that the most dangerous works, such as drilling, were as far from the accommodation block as possible. When Piper was belatedly fitted for gas extraction, some of the gas compression works had to be sited close to sensitive areas, such as the control room. This was to have tragic consequences. In the weeks leading up to July the 6th, a new gas pipeline was being installed, which involved welding work and changes to the normal operating routine. The platform was not shut down while work progressed. Several small gas leaks had been reported, though this was not unusual. On July the 6th, one other piece of work was going on. The platform had 2 large pumps, A and B, which pressurized the gas and sent it onto shore. Pump A had been taken out of service that morning and a pressure valve removed from it for servicing. The open pipe was temporarily sealed with a metal plate. The pressure valve was meant to be replaced by the end of the day, but the job overran.
All right, lads, pack it up. We're not running over here. I'll have to finish in the morning, I guess.
The engineer in charge filled out the permit to work form, which let everyone know that the pump was out of action and couldn't be used. In fact, 2 permits had been taken out that morning for the pump. One was for the work on the pressure valve, the other for a routine overhaul, which would last 2 weeks but hadn't yet begun. The 2 permits became separated. When work finished for the day, the engineer returned the permit for the pressure valve to the control room. Finding the supervisor busy, he signed off the permit to work. He failed to inform the supervisor that the valve was off the pump and went off shift. No one knows what became of the permit for the pressure valve.
The permit to work system on Piper had degraded. It hadn't been working well for many, many months. They weren't, in fact, thinking through in a proper way the risks of the process before they filled the permit in. Otherwise, a number of the things that occurred at the time couldn't possibly have occurred. And the whole thing was treated, it would appear, more or less as a formality.
Another irregular practice was taking place that evening. In common with other platforms, Piper Alpha had an automatic fire deluge system. When triggered, diesel pumps would suck up huge amounts of seawater to douse any fires. But when divers were at work, the diesel pumps were switched over from automatic to manual start to prevent any divers being sucked up by the intakes. On other rigs, the pumps were switched to manual only if the divers were very near the intakes. But on Piper, they were switched over regardless of where the divers were working, so the firefighting system could only be started by hand. At 9:45, the swift spiral to disaster began.
Phase 1 operator, over. We've got a trip on B pump. Better get down here and have a look at it, over.
The second gas pump, Pump B, which had not been taken out of service, had stopped. If it could not be restarted within minutes, the gas supply for the rig would have to be shut down. Since the platform was powered by gas-fueled generators, the danger was that it could lose all power. If drilling was going on, the drill could get stuck at enormous cost. The supervisor kept a watchful eye as Pump B repeatedly failed to restart.
Okay. Look, hold on a second. What's up?
Can't get it started.
How come?
I don't know. There's lube oil on the floor. Someone's talking about hydrates. Pump B's out for maintenance.
Right.
But it's a 2-week job. They only started it today. It's only been electrically isolated, I think. Where's the PTW for it?
The engineer retrieved the permit for the 2-week maintenance job on Pump A. He was not aware that there was a second permit for the work on the pressure valve, so he didn't know that it had been removed.
I'll sign it off. We'll get Pump A back on. We can use that one.
All right.
Maintenance, lead hand. Contact control room.
Tell give them the okay and tell them we're going to go straight away with it, all right?
Since the maintenance work hadn't yet started on Pump A, the supervisor assumed that it would be safe to restart.
Have you earthed it yet? Not yet. Come on, we've got 2 or 3 minutes here. Come on.
As Pump A was prepared for restarting, no one noticed that the vital pressure valve was missing, since the metal plate was 15 feet up and hidden by machinery.
You moved it yet? Come on! We're short of time here.
Just before 10 o'clock, the operators restarted Pump A.
All right, give it a go. Disarm, zone 3.
Maintenance lead hand, we've got a trip on 2 of the centrifugal compressors, over.
As gas flowed into the pump at high pressure, the strain became too much for the temporary metal plate. With 70 kilograms of gas escaping in under 30 seconds, alarms went off everywhere. The supervisor hit the emergency shutdown, closing huge valves in the pipes rising from the seabed. This stopped oil and gas production and should have isolated the rig. But the blast had blown down fireproofed walls to the adjoining oil separation area, rupturing pipes and, as this footage taken just minutes after the explosion shows, starting an oil fire. The weakness of the firewalls was another legacy of Piper's inadequate design.
One might ask why the company had put in firewalls but had not put in blast walls. And one has to say that if you don't really analyze risks properly, if you don't really think the unthinkable, then all that putting in blast walls or whatever may represent is an awful lot of money, because they are costly, with no particular apparent advantage. So you're not inclined to spend money on things that you don't think are useful. You don't know how useful they're going to be unless you've really thought about it very thoroughly and deeply in advance.
At this point, it's probable only 2 men had been killed, and the situation was far from hopeless. Other rigs had faced similar oil fires and either put them out or evacuated the men. But Piper's emergency procedures simply collapsed. Control was centered around the rig's manager, who was supposed to coordinate firefighting and evacuation from the radio room.
Put out a mayday.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Explosion and fire on the oil rig, on the platform, and we're abandoning the rig.
But the radio room itself was damaged, and it appears that no attempt was made to use the public address system.
There's a fire.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. We're abandoning the radio room. We're abandoning the radio room.
Transcripts of the maydays reveal that no indication was given to the emergency services of how the rig was to be abandoned. Worse still, no one told the men on board what to do. From what training they had received, the men were supposed to muster at their lifeboat stations and await instructions over the tannoy. But the fire stopped them from reaching the boats, so they assembled in the fireproofed accommodation block to await evacuation by helicopter. Over 100 men gathered in the galley area, just beneath the helideck. But the wind was blowing smoke and flames over the helideck, making landing impossible. The men were given no further instructions other than to wait. Although the accommodation block was gradually filling with smoke, at no point was there an organized attempt to lead them to safety. When the fire deluge system failed to start, 2 men bravely attempted to reach the vital diesel pumps that had been switched to manual. They never made it and were never seen again. The emergency shutdown had stopped oil production on Piper, yet the oil fire continued to rage. It would eventually have burnt itself out, had it not been for the actions of adjoining rigs. Piper Alpha was at the center of a network of rigs. Along with Piper, the Tartan and Claymore platforms pumped oil into the main onshore oil line. This pumping caused back pressure in Piper's oil line. It was forcing oil out of the ruptured pipes, fueling the fire on Piper. To prevent this backflow of oil, it was vital that the 2 other rigs stopped pumping immediately. 22 miles away, Claymore heard the first mayday.
You trying Piper?
Communications between the platforms had been knocked out in the explosion, yet the manager of Claymore continued to pump oil, believing that the situation was most likely under control.
We just got a second mayday. It's a big explosion. They might have lost the radio room and all.
Stand by vessel Nautica. Proceed to Piper. See if there's anything they need.
The manager tried to contact Occidental's control center on shore, meanwhile continuing oil production.
There's been an explosion on Piper and there's a fire on the west side. There's a lot of black smoke blowing over the helideck.
It sounds like an oil fire. Look, if it's a big one, Piper's lines are going to fail. I think we should shut down.
Has Piper shut down?
Yeah, they have.
How's the pressure on the line?
Yeah, it's holding up all right.
Don't shut down.
Meanwhile, the Tartan rig, only 12 miles away, in spite of hearing the maydays and seeing flames on the horizon, also continued to pump oil. The manager had received approval for this decision from his superior in Aberdeen.
There's always a potential conflict between production and safety. The revenue on a daily basis of an offshore platform can be very considerable indeed. When you shut a platform down, it's a difficult matter to restart it. It may take you 2 or 3 days to get back up to full, proper production. So it's not a decision you lightly take. Unless you give an OIM the authority to take a difficult decision in that situation without fear of subsequently being blamed, then people will delay, they will be inhibited, they will wait too long, and things can get much worse.
The oil spewing from the shattered pipes on Piper heated up something far more hazardous. There were huge gas lines also coming in from the adjoining rigs. These meter-wide pipes ran for miles and contained thousands of tons of highly pressurized flammable gas. The dangers were well known to Occidental's management. They had commissioned a report 2 years earlier which warned, these pipelines, especially the gas pipelines, would take hours to depressurize because of their capacity. This could result in a high-pressure gas fire on the cellar deck that would be virtually impossible to fight. Yet nothing had been done either to protect or strengthen the pipelines. At 10:20, the tartaned gas pipeline melted and burst. Three tons of gas were coming out of the ruptured pipe every second, 1.5 times the entire UK gas consumption in an area just 75 meters square. Yet even this did not seal the fate of those on board. Such was the efficiency of the fire cladding on the accommodation block that most of the men were still alive, although increasingly overcome by smoke. Some took matters into their own hands, found their way down through the accommodation block, and although they'd been told that it would mean certain death, made the 10-story jump into the sea. The second explosion knocked out the telephone link between Claymore and Occidental's onshore control center.
That's gone now.
Can we shut down now?
Now I need to talk to the emergency centre. Let's try and get them on the satellite system.
We should shut down.
Tharos engaged in firefighting with Maersk cutter also alongside. Other vessels and boats in the area. Numerous other vessels are proceeding. Other casualties sighted on the drill floor of Piper. Anticipate very high casualties. Believe casualties still on board platform.
This is Claymore. Do you read? Over.
You can see the bloody fire from here. We really should shut down right now.
Their fire pumps should be coping. I'm still trying to reach the centre.
Look, they just told us there's men in the water. They've abandoned the bloody rig. What more do you want?
ECC, do you read? This is Claymore. Over.
Although he repeatedly asked to shut down, the operator deferred to the seniority of his manager, and the oil continued to flow. Yet there was still one last route of escape, other than jumping into the sea. The Tharos, a gigantic safety vessel, had been built by Occidental precisely to deal with emergencies on their rigs. By pure chance, it was anchored that day close to Piper Alpha. It should have been a godsend. But having maneuvered up to the rig, Tharos turned on its fire hoses too fast, tripped out the system, and wasted 10 minutes getting them restarted. Worse still, the extendable gangway proved painfully slow. It took 5 minutes to move 2 feet. So to extend to its full 30 meters took over an hour. At 10:50, they ran out of time. A second gas pipeline burst, containing thousands of tons of gas under enormous pressure. The intense heat drove the Tharos back, and from then on, the crew could only witness as the platform slowly melted and collapsed. The manager on Claymore had finally raised Occidental's onshore management.
No figures as yet. I don't know. Yeah.
It's got really bad. Ask him if we could shut down.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Ask him!
What's happening?
There's another explosion. Just ask him if we should shut down.
All right, shut it down.
What's your status out there?
We're still online.
You what?
Prepare for controlled shutdown of MOL. I repeat, prepare for controlled shutdown of MOL.
Shut down now. Blow down the gas line to Piper. Get hold of Tartan and tell them to shut down too.
If Claymore and Tartan had shut down oil production when they'd heard the first maydays, it might well have significantly reduced the fire threatening the gas pipes on Piper Alpha, at least delaying their rupture, if not preventing it. After withstanding the intense heat for over an hour, the accommodation block finally slid into the sea, and most of the rig fell after it. Of the 226 men who had been on board Piper Alpha, 166 were dead. One more died later in hospital. Only 61 men survived, almost all because they had decided to ignore what little training they had been given and jumped from the burning rig.
I'll run ahead of you.
Won't you just take us through your escape?
The escape was we managed to get outside after about an hour, going about the accommodation. We get out and into a fab shop. When the rig started tilting over, the fab shop tilted over, and believe it or not, the jib of a crane, toppled, and that made a bridge, that we could get along to the edge and jump into the water from there.
How far did you have to jump?
About 100 feet.
Can you give us some idea of the sort of thoughts that were going through your mind during that ordeal?
You think, there was 3 occasions when we were trapped in the accommodation, you thought it was all over. When we got outside and couldn't get over to the rig, over to the side, we were trapped in this fab shop and there was things flying about and hitting you, and at one stage I got trapped and never got hurt. I don't know how, big heavy steelwork moved right up to me and never, it touched me, but never broke anything. So you thought you'd had it then, and when you went into the water, you thought you'd had it then. It was just horrendous,
When the Grampian police flew out to the location of Piper Alpha, this is all that was left. Ironically, it was part of the drilling deck, supposedly the most dangerous area, at the opposite end of the accommodation block. Three-quarters of the original platform had disappeared. The giant gas fires had generated temperatures over 1,000 degrees centigrade, literally melting the legs from under the platform. The management of Occidental, including Chief Executive Armand Hammer, were adamant that their safety record was impeccable.
I think we have taken every precaution we know how. You must remember this is the first time in 12 years that we've had a casualty on any of our rigs in the North Sea.
In fact, an oil worker had been killed on Piper Alpha 4 years earlier. The exhaustive public inquiry into the disaster, held under Lord Cullen, eventually described Occidental's approach to safety as superficial. It cited a catalogue of errors and shortcomings, many of which were relevant to other North Sea operators.
I wouldn't put it above or below other disasters. There is actually an awful sameness about these incidents. They're nearly always characterized by lack of forethought and lack of analysis, and nearly always the problem comes down to poor management. It's not just due to one particular person not following a procedure or doing something wrong. You always come back to the fact that things are sloppy and ill-organized and unsystematic right from the top of the company downwards.
In the wake of the Cullen inquiry, the oil companies spent billions redesigning platforms and improving safety. Many rigs were fitted with seabed shut-off valves in their gas and oil lines. Lifeboat entry points were brought inside the accommodation blocks, and these in turn were reinforced with better fire and smoke protection. On top of this, the overall regulatory responsibility was taken away from the Department of Energy and handed to the Health and Safety Executive, which Lord Cullen felt was more suited to the task.
North Sea operations maybe have another 20 or 30 years to run. The hope has to be that there will never be another major accident of that sort, and I think there's a reasonable expectation that there won't be, because so much has been learnt from it. I mean, Piper Alpha was a terrible tragedy, but if we learn the lessons from it and put them into effect, then at least future events will have been prevented.
But if improvements have been made, it took the lives of 167 men to bring them about. Yet there are still at least 10 gas escapes a year, as large as the one which triggered the Piper Alpha disaster. Occidental destroyed the twisted remains of Piper Alpha within a year. They have since sold off their interests and left the North Sea.
Will you go back to work offshore?
No, I don't think so. No.